Welcome to the ABCs of Performing, where I combine my love of food with my love of my career to give you an inside look at what it means to be a performer in New York City. I think I'm facing the facts that I'm never going to find a shorter way to say that, so I'm sticking with it. My name is Nicole, and I am a dancer, singer, actress, model in New York City. I've performed in modern dance companies, regional theater, TV shows, movies, commercials, print work, and today's topic, cruise ships, or rather cruise ship. I've only ever worked on one. I spent 4 years on the Disney Fantasy cruise ship as a MainStage dancer. This is mainly for anybody who is either thinking about auditioning for a cruise ship, or maybe you've already booked the gig and you're on your way. We're going to prepare you for what's to come and hopefully give you some tips to help you have a fantastic time. And by we, I mean me, because it's literally a one-woman show here. There are a lot of subtopics I could touch on when it comes to working on a cruise ship. So for the sake of narrowing it down, I'm going to focus on 3 things that you're going to want to know before you sign your contract. My biggest tip is knowing what your job entails. My assumption prior to getting on board the cruise ship was that my only job would be performing in the theater, because that's what I auditioned for. I auditioned as a dancer, and therefore I assumed that I would only be a dancer. My first contract was actually my first cruise ever. I had never sailed on a cruise ship prior to that moment, so I was either going to love my life for 6 months or be absolutely miserable for 6 months. And thank God that I loved it. However, working on board the Disney Fantasy cruise ship, we had 3 main jobs that we were responsible for. Number 1 was being in the theater, because that was what we were hired to do. We rehearsed the shows 2.5 months in Toronto prior to actually boarding the ship for 6 months, and so that was our main objective. We did Wishes, Believe, and Aladdin. My third contract, which was our COVID contract, we learned Frozen for the first time. We did Aladdin, Frozen, and Believe. We had 2 smaller shows that happened in the adult bar areas, and then Pirate Night that happened up on the deck stage where the fireworks would go off afterwards. Our second job was what I lovingly refer to as being Mickey Mouse's bodyguard. It's greeting. 45 minutes each day, or like an hour each day. It could be a longer shift like Princess Gathering or Frozen Gathering, where you would have like a 2-hour shift and then you would have like a day off, but you can only be scheduled for up to 7 hours in that week. We were responsible for setting up lines, closing the lines, and then also escorting our character friends around the ship, whether you were on a stroll walking around the ship or whether or not you had a specific station set up where guests would come and take photos. Our third job was our safety duty, and everybody on board any cruise ship that you will ever work on will have a safety duty. And that is because you live on a floating home. Now, the capacity of what your role is will change depending on what your rank is on the ship and what your training has been. We were either muster station leaders or muster station deputy leaders. We were responsible for the communication between the safety team or the safety department and the guest. We would do a guest drill whenever guests got on board. I was usually the deputy leader. I would basically check people in and make sure everybody was accounted for who was supposed to be there, because no matter how many times you sail, you have to do guest drill. And a lot of people would love to kind of flex how many times that they've sailed and try to get out of it. And it wasn't up to us as a ship, it was up to the maritime law, and it was something that we had to follow. So if people didn't show up, then they would get a knock on their door later on where a safety officer would come and require that they go through the safety training at a later time. So even if you try to avoid it, you still have to do it. So those were our main 3 jobs: performing, greeting, safety duty. One of the biggest ways that you can understand that is 1, reading in detail through your contract, or having somebody read through it for you and explain what everything means. 2nd, speaking to people who have done the contract before, finding people online or finding people that you know in person who have sailed with a specific cruise line that you're about to work with, and just asking them about their experience and what they liked, what they didn't like, things that they wish they knew ahead of time as well. And just really setting yourself up for success in that way to understand what it is that you're walking into. Because a lot of the times, many people have no idea what they're stepping into when it comes to working on a cruise ship, because it's very different than doing what it is that we do on land. The second thing to know before you get on board is your itinerary. Knowing where it is that you're going to be and what that weather could look like. We would rehearse for 2.5 months in Toronto, in Canada, and then we would leave and go to Florida in order to board the ship from Cape Canaveral. I would spend 2.5 months in the dead of winter. My plane would usually leave from December 26th, so I would get to spend Christmas at home, and then I would be in Toronto from December 26th until the end of February, at which time we would then transfer from the dead of winter into Orlando, Florida for a couple of days for training, or if all of your trainings were up to date, then you could spend 3 days in the parks. And then we would go to Cape Canaveral where we would board the ship. That weather was such a stark difference between Canada to Florida that I found it easier personally just to pack my winter stuff. I would have one bag that was kind of my all-encompassing, I need this all year round. That would have all my workout clothes, my rollers, or my little like workout balls or anything like that that I would need on a regular ongoing basis, toiletries. And then I would have a second bag that was weather appropriate. And I always made sure that I would take suitcases that could stack inside of each other because our rooms were not that large. So that way I would be able to minimize my space. A lot of people were able to pack bags that folded as well, which is always nice. Sort of like rolling duffel bags, which is also a good suggestion as well. And then I would ship all of my summer stuff straight to Florida. So we were given an address, and then we could have all of our items that we wanted to come to the ship sent there. And so you could receive mail while you were on board the entire time, which was really nice as well. So I would pack my winter stuff. I would pack a second bag with all of my things that I needed for the entire contract. And then I would pack a box before I left, and I would have a family member or a friend of mine ship it for me from Maryland, where I was at the time, to the ship. So that way, once I got to the ship, I would have my box ready with all of my summer stuff. I would pack like a bathing suit and like 2 or 3 outfits that I could survive in while I was in Orlando for those first 3 days of training before we got to the ship to pick up our stuff that was shipped there. And then I would unpack all of my summer stuff, repack all of my winter stuff, and ship my winter stuff to a family member or to a friend of mine. And then I was good to go. I found that to be the easiest way to kind of handle that. So it's good to know where it is that you're heading so you can prep for those things ahead of time and know what you're going to need weather-wise. Now, I'm an overpacker, so it's totally possible that people could get more than one wardrobe of appropriate weather gear into the same suitcase, and that's definitely an option. I just found it easier to pack everything that I needed and then ship things back and forth that way. But knowing your itinerary will tell you whether or not you need to do any of those things. It'll also tell you what your time zone is going to be as well, so you can start mentally preparing yourself for whether or not you're going to be 6 hours behind what your body's used to. For us, we had a time zone change when we would go from certain islands into Mexico and vice versa. So it would be like a 24-hour time zone change, in which case we would be like an hour behind or an hour ahead. So those things are good to know as well. Also, along the idea of time is learning to read military times. That is how the ships operate. Just to kill any confusion between AM and PM and all that jazz, they just use a 24-hour time system, which I still have on my phone to this day. And a lot of people will see my phone and ask me about that. And that's why I worked on a cruise ship for 4 years and for some reason have not felt the need to change it back. The third thing I suggest that you do before you jump on a cruise ship is to prep your entertainment. One of the things I was really shocked about was how much downtime I actually had while on board the ship. It's kind of wild, and I know that we were very privileged in our department to have that, because there are a lot of departments that do not have nearly as much time off as we did. Because our main job was performing, our duties basically didn't start until the evenings, and we would have 3 days of shows in the big theater, which seated about 1,200 people. And so we would do each show twice in that night. And the shows were opposite dinner time. So we would have a 6:15 show and an 8:30 p.m. show of the same one, so that each dinner time frame had an opportunity to see the show and go to dinner, or vice versa, go to dinner and then see the show. So apart from that, usually during the day, we had a lot of downtime. There were people who would take some of their free time and write music. They would write the screenplays and things that they've had on their minds. Having that much downtime and not having to worry about rent or paying for food or cooking or anything like that, it really frees up your mind and allows you to fully access your creativity. If you are going to create things, though, I will say to be careful about producing those things while you're on contract, because there are some companies that have stipulations and things in their contract where if you read through the fine lines, you will see that if you produce or create things while you're on contract with them, that it belongs to that company. So just make sure that you understand how your contracts work. You may not be able to produce those things or put them out at that time, but you can still do the prep work, which is nice. For my itinerary, I had cell service twice a week. I would have it every Saturday whenever we would dock, because we did 7-day cruises. So every Saturday we would come into Florida, we would drop off guests, we would pick up more guests, and then we would go back through our itinerary, which changed every other week. One week I would have cell service in St. Thomas, and then the other week, whenever we were on the other itinerary, I would have cell service in Mexico. So the times in between, I would make sure that I would download anything that I wanted to watch while I was on board that wasn't available on the crew TVs. They do have crew content, and so those are like general movies and films that they'll rotate each month. And so I would make sure that I purchased books, to download books on your Kindle. I'm like a handheld type of book person, so I would make sure that I, ordered my books. You can also get them shipped to the ship. But it's good to prep your entertainment beforehand, especially if you don't have cell service in your itinerary. So every time that we were in Florida or Mexico or St. Thomas, I would download episodes of the TV shows that I was watching at the time. I would make sure that I had books readily available. We also had the luxury of having like a small library in one of our little crew rooms, where you could go and just like pick up a book and people would leave them there as well. You end up with a lot more downtime than I had ever imagined. And that is something that I absolutely loved having, just being able to go and sit in the sun, and also the ability to get off the ship as well and to just explore and do those things. And so I think it was helpful to think about my entertainment for the week before we left Florida. So that way, if it was something that required the internet, that I could download it ahead of time and have those things ready for the week. Those are my 3 suggestions for before you sign that contract or before you get on board. I hope that was helpful as you prepare for your cruise contract or prepare to go audition for a cruise contract. If you've watched this video and you've sailed before, let me know what I missed, what other tips that you would include for anyone who's just starting a cruise contract for the first time. What helped you? What were things that you wish you knew beforehand? If you're about to go off on a cruise ship and have other questions that I may not have answered in this video, let me know down below and I will get back to you. Happy sailing! Thought it was appropriate to wear my Disney paraphernalia today. I think that's it, actually. I don't have anything else Disney. That's shocking. Welcome to the... Welcome. I feel like I almost always knock a cup over every time I do these videos. That's really good. I had to go back and add a little bit of coffee because I might have gone a little bit overboard with the caramel. Yeah! Okay, and I performed for... I just forgot my resume. Silly. It's a lot of ships. Still have not cleaned my desk. Ooh, that was a lot. Talking for that much time is a lot of work.